Unit 16. Gateway. Because elephant groups break up and reunite very frequently, for instance in response to variation in food availability, reunions are more important in elephant society than among primates. And the species has evolved elaborate greeting behaviors, the form of which reflects the strength of the social bond between the individuals, much like how you might merely shake hands with a long-standing acquaintance, but hug a close friend you have not seen in a while, and maybe even tear up. Elephants may greet each other simply by reaching their trunks into each other's mouths, possibly equivalent to a human peck on the cheek. However, after long absences, members of family and bond groups greet one another with incredibly theatrical displays. The fact that the intensity reflects the duration of the separation, as well as the level of intimacy, suggests that elephants have a sense of time as well. To human eyes, these greetings strike a familiar chord. I'm reminded of the joyous reunions so visible in the arrivals area of an international airport terminal. The evolved greeting behaviors of elephants can serve as an indicator of how much they are socially tied and how long they have been parted. Exercise 1. Recent research has shown that trees are not as passive as we long supposed. To investigate this further, European scientists simulated attacks on small beeches and maples. Whenever a roe deer takes a bite out of the top growth of a young tree, it leaves a little saliva behind in the wound, and it soon became clear that wounded trees can clearly detect the presence of this saliva. To simulate browsing by roe deer, the researchers cut off buds or leaves and dripped roe deer saliva onto the damaged areas. What they noticed was that in response, the little trees produced salicylic acid, which in turn led to an increased production of bad-tasting defensive compounds, which discouraged the roe deer from eating them. However, when the scientists simply broke off new growth without applying any saliva, all the beeches and maples produced were hormones to heal the damage as quickly as possible. Recent research has shown that trees are able to recognize predator attacks, and for protection against them, they produce foul-tasting chemicals. Exercise 2. Historical linguists study the languages spoken today, and from them make estimates about the ancestral languages from which they descended. Where possible, linguists also work from written records on languages in earlier times. For linguistics, as for genetics, we assume that present data give us the remnants of earlier communities. But the definition of earlier community is different in each case. For language, it is assumed that each language has one parent. In genetics, a person has more and more ancestors as one goes to earlier generations, while a language has a single ancestor at each stage. The tree model of language presents the range of languages descended from an ancestor and indicates relationships with other languages descended from the same ancestor. Because of the single ancestor characteristics of the linguistic tree model, language gives more evidence on path of early human migration than does genetics, because it allows for fewer possibilities. Historical linguistics is similar to genetics in how it traces the present stage back to earlier ones, but differs in that it uses a single entity at each stage from which descendants originate. Exercise 3. The more things change, the more they stay the same. One thing that has remained the same over the centuries is parental disdain for the new kind of world they see around them. This world is only new to us, and it's the only one our children know. They haven't lived long enough to see the kind of social change that has taken place in the last 20 or 30 years. For them, what they see around them is normal, and they have nothing to compare it with until they start to learn about history. It has always been this way. Parents feel the changes in the world, kids don't. Parents often react defensively, and children do not understand what all the fuss is about. Negative parental reactions often originate in hostility toward change. Most adults tend to see their own formative years as normal, and what comes afterward as a decline. The only constant is change, and parents and their children experience this in fundamentally different ways. Parents tend to have a negative attitude toward change, which their children, being unaware of change itself, do not understand. Exercise 4. Because scientific research is so often conducted in the interests of national defense or under the sponsorship of private firms that hope to profit from applications of the findings, the norms of common ownership and publication are often suspended. Such situations have led to innumerable conflicts in scientific circles. An outstanding example is the race to publish the complete map and inventory of the human genome. All the sequences of human DNA that constitute our genes. In 2001, two rival groups raced to be the first to complete the research. One in the private sector, the Celera Genomics Corporation led by J. Craig Venter, and the other a government-funded laboratory headed by Francis Collins. An argument raged over whether the private corporation was trying to establish patents on human genetic sequences, a violation of the norm of openness. The public laboratory had, or claimed to have, no such business interest. Eventually, the competing teams compromised and issued a joint publication of the map. But the controversy and legal battles over issuing patents for genetic material have continued. As in the case of the publication of the Human Genome Map and Inventory, publicly and privately funded research on the same topic may trigger heated debates over the exclusive ownership of research findings. Unit